It doesn't get much rougher than this 55 Chevrolet dirt track car, but I think I'm in love with it. This thing was sitting in the parking lot at the Dan Chuck Tri-Five Nationals, not even part of the show, but it definitely got my attention, and I think you guys will like it too. Let's walk around this thing and take a good look at it. I mean, it is rough, but that's how they built these cars back in the day. They did not do precise fabrication. They didn't do, they just didn't have the standards that we have nowadays. And you can tell, I mean, this thing is rough. It is what most people would consider cobbled together, but cars like this were completely common in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even up into the 90s. People were still running these Tri-Five Chevys. And a lot of what these guys did still applies to dirt track racing today. So we're going to look at this car and, just get an idea of what these guys did back in the day, because this thing is about as authentic as you can get. The only things that have been changed on this car are the engine and the right front tire and wheel assembly. The rest of this thing is just like this dude found it. He said it came from Indiana. He lives in Kentucky, but he just put him an engine in there. He got the thing where it would roll, and he explained to me that there's a lot of original parts on here, like the rear end. That's a 54 Chevrolet truck rear end. It's got floating axles. You can see that they've added shocks to it. Normally it just have 2 shocks. It looks like it has 3, maybe 4 shocks under here. And then the front suspension is altered as well. It's got this big tall shock on the right front, I guess to kind of hold the front of the car up when it goes piling off into the corner. And then these original Firestone dirt track tires, these things are so cool. They're chewed all to pieces, but he put tubes in there and they hold air miraculously. So he's got this thing up to where he can actually move it around if he wants to, and wait until the end of the video and you're going to hear this thing run, and it's got a pretty healthy small block in it. I think you're going to enjoy it. As we make our way around the car, the thing that really got my attention at first was the chop top. And that's not something that I see all that often on some of the other vintage dirt track cars that I see. But the chop top on this car makes it look so mean, and it's just hugged right down onto the roll cage. But you can see that the top is completely rotten. It's coming apart. The drip rails have just come loose, where they've cut and welded the top. All that stuff's kind of starting to come loose. But it is so cool. And he's propped up the back of the roof just so that it doesn't completely collapse. But really got a cool look to it. That little bit lower of a chop in the front than the back, so it kind of gives it this really aggressive look. But then we look inside and it's rotten in there too. There's not hardly any floors. You can see the roll cage is pretty extensive. Actually a little more cage than I would have imagined in this type of car. But you can also see on the ends of some of these tubes that there's threads on there, which means this is made out of water pipe. Definitely not out of the ordinary for back in the day. They'd use exhaust tubing, water pipe, anything they could do to get a cage in the car and be safe or legal or whatever. And that's the case with this car. It's got a ton of bars in it, but it looks like they're all made out of water pipe. As for the rest of the interior, it's got a homemade dash in it, and you can see they've wrapped this steering wheel up. That's what they used to do back in the day. And then it's got some vintage gauges, the switches, all that stuff appears to be pretty much original to the car. But I love the seat in here. It's got just a single seat. I'm not totally sure what that would have come out of. It's some sort of low back bucket seat. And then the seat belts are actually military belts. So I don't know exactly where they came from, but probably out of some type of airplane. I don't know. One of the coolest details that he pointed out to me was that the steering shaft, you see it right under the dash there, it goes down to a timing chain set. That's off of a small block Chevy or some type of V8, and it actually quickens the steering ratio. So that chain goes up to a smaller pulley, and then that goes to the steering box and linkage and all that. So that was a basically free modification to make this thing steer a lot quicker and take a little bit of that slop out of there that would have been there in the original 55 box. He had the original front tire and wheel in the back of his truck. I'm guessing it just wouldn't hold air, and he replaced it with just a generic tire and wheel on the right front. But the rest of this thing is just so cool. You can see that it's actually still got the stainless steel trim on the belt line, and then you can also see where they filled in the door handle and door lock holes. And then, of course, the lettering, the old decals. I mean, this thing has got all the right stuff. It's not a made-up car. This is as original as you can get. As we look under the hood, it's got a few old decals under there, and then you can see that it's got a pretty modern small block Chevy in it. It's got a single plane intake. It's got a pretty modern 4-barrel carburetor on it, and this tall breather, the blue anodized valve covers, the fender well headers. Those are cool pieces too. And even on the passenger side, you can see that it has a Reed Cam sticker, which Reed Cams has been out of business for many, many years. That was John Reed down in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Pretty influential guy who unfortunately passed away way too soon, but Reed Cam sticker is a nice touch on this thing. And you'll notice on this side, the passenger side, it doesn't have a fender well header, and that's probably because of this giant shock mount that's totally in the way. But still, very cool. Lots of neat details on this thing. It's got a 4-speed in it with just 3rd and 4th gear. So that's what a lot of the dirt track guys would do. They'd put a 4-speed, either a Saginaw or Muncie or T10, something like that, and just use 3rd and 4th gear. So a lot of these cars, they were really hard to take off. Sometimes they had to be push started because of the gearing situation. And I can't believe that it still has a grill and front bumper on it. I would think those pieces would just be demolished by now, but they're still hanging in there. Same to be said for the rear of the car. I mean, there's still some pieces surviving on this thing, including the back bumper. Deck lid is still there. I see all these different holes and things drilled in it. I'm assuming for weight purposes, or might be for airflow purposes, ventilation. I don't know. I don't know that much about it. But this thing is just beyond cool. You can see the super rough radius on the wheel wells. I mean, they did not take a lot of time to make this happen. They just folded that metal out of the way to make room for those big tires. And it's just one of the coolest things that I saw at the Tri-Five Nationals, and it wasn't even inside the show. So I figured you guys would enjoy seeing it, see a little bit of dirt track racing history, because most of my channel is about old drag racing. But cars like this old school dirt track car, you know, they're out there too. They're in the woods. They're stuffed behind people's houses and behind the barn. These things still survive. Even though they're rough, even though they're not salvageable in many ways, they're still very fun to look at. And I figured you guys would enjoy it. I know I did.
And then this road look like it's been rolled too. But it had a tree across the road. This is just amazing. It is, you know, and the transmission, it's come out with stock car. It's a Muncie, but it's just got 3rd and 4th, and it's hard to drive it, you know. But I've got a Hayes racing plow clutch in it.
And this motor runs here?
Oh, I just had it running.
You just had it run? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
and you, if you could take this over?
Oh yeah.